Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We're just going to give it a few moments. We have some people coming in still, so just a few more moments here. All right, let's go ahead and begin. So hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. You may notice that the layout looks a bit different from what you're used to, and we are excited to introduce to you our new webinar platform. This platform is more interactive and customizable for each attendee, so you can personalize your view by moving, resizing, or hiding different elements on the screen. Simply use the corners of the icons to adjust the size or position of the boxes to do so. We encourage you to engage with us using the interactive tools on your dashboard. If you have any questions throughout, please submit them using the questions box on the lower right-hand corner of your dashboard. We will do our best to address your questions in real time. You will also notice a survey on your dashboard. Please fill this out anytime during the presentation. To let us know your thoughts throughout the presentation, use the emojis. To access the emojis, click the smiley face on the right side on your lower banner. Your feedback is valuable to us and it is used to craft our future webinars. For those of you who may be seeking CPE credit, you will need to answer all 4 poll questions during the webinar. CPE certificates will be sent out via email within a couple of weeks. Lastly, this session is being recorded. We will send out a link to the recording within a few days, so you can revisit any part of the presentation. If you want a copy of the slide deck, you can download it from the left side of your screen at any time. Now that we've got all those details covered, for those of you who may not know who Richie May is, Richie May was founded 40 years ago to focus exclusively on the needs of entrepreneurs and business owners with a dedicated focus on the mortgage banking industry. This singular intent has enabled us to understand the market and our clients in unparalleled ways and has led us to the innovation that powers our growth. We have a full suite of services and products through Richie May Advisory, including cybersecurity, business intelligence, subservicer oversight, and SOC reports, as well as a deep level of expertise in our audit and tax groups. With that being said, I will turn it over to today's presenters to introduce themselves. Michael and Tony, take it away.
Thanks, Jamie. Excited to have everybody here today. Looking forward to talking through the Constantinople Strategy and cost savings initiatives in cybersecurity. My name is Michael Nugier. That's Noogie like you're giving a kid a Noogie, and yay like they're excited about it. And I am the CISO for Richie May, and I also am the partner in charge of cybersecurity services for Richie May. I am joined today by Tony Raymer, and I'll let Tony introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. My name is Tony Raymer. I'm the Senior Vice President of Information Technology for Children's Miracle Network Hospitals. And Children's Miracle Network Hospitals is a charity that raises money for children's hospitals in the United States. So a little bit of context about today. Michael is a cybersecurity expert, has very broad and both very deep cybersecurity knowledge. I'm a cybersecurity implementer. So I have 10 information technology departments that report to me. Cybersecurity is one of those departments. And working for a charity, we're always looking for ways to keep our costs down. So Michael and I have partnered on today's webinar to go over some common themes and discussion points that we'll be going over today.
Just a quick agenda, and then we're going to ask a poll question as a part of the CPE strategy on this webinar. We're going to walk through a handful of items here, defining what cybersecurity is so that we have a baseline and foundational understanding of where we're coming from a cybersecurity perspective. We're going to recap the Constantinople Strategy. That is a blog post that we wrote, and this deck will have the link to that in it as well. And so it does touch on the strategy and some cybersecurity concepts, and we'll be going through those in this webinar. Moving through this, we're going to talk about, what we envision a CFO's role is and what we see through our services and through our experience in cybersecurity, some financial implications of a cybersecurity incident, touch on the cost-saving benefits of investing in cybersecurity and how those investments can be catered to increase the benefit to the organization, lowering costs over time, some strategies for risk reduction, actionable steps that CFOs can take, and then some key takeaways. From there, we'll get into our first poll question before we start anything else here. And that question is, are you confident that you can cut cyber costs without increasing risk? This is a very important question because our actions have consequences. One of those things that I tell my children all the time, if you stay up late, you're going to be tired the next morning. If you cut costs in cyber, you need to be very confident on what happens by cutting those costs. Are you introducing risk by removing a tool set or by letting go of skill sets, things like that? So I'll give everybody time to answer. I believe you do have to answer if you are looking for CPE credits in this one. So. Looks like about half of the attendees have submitted so far. Not going to stick too much on here. We haven't seen much more traction here. Couple more seconds and then we'll move forward and we can see some of those poll results here of people that answered this question. Very few people are very confident. Some are somewhat confident. This is what we would have envisioned, right? Typically CFOs, and we'll talk about this, are risk averse, right? And they're focused heavily on risk. Typically that affects the financial well-being of the organization. I don't have to tell this audience, as most of us are in that role. So I'll move forward and on to the definition of what is cybersecurity. And this is what Richie May defines as cybersecurity, right? It is the practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks by using a combination of people, process, and technology in an effort to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets or data that allow our business to function, right? The core function of cybersecurity is to protect data, and there are three elements to protecting that data, right? The three tenets that make up data security, and that is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If any one of those is removed, then the chain is broken, the security is broken on that, and we lose faith and trust in that data. What we're talking about from a cost savings perspective, the triggers that you can pull, the levers you can pull to lower cost really are the three in the Venn diagram on the left. You can either lower the people, you can create improved processes or remove processes, or you can integrate more cost-effective technology or remove technology. So you're pulling levers in those three areas to see those cost savings in technology. Perfect. I'll move on to the next slide, which is just a recap of the Constantinople Strategy. It's a well-written blog post that Richie May has put out. The link is at the bottom of this slide. The recap is basically, if you've heard of Constantinople, there's actually a song about it. It was a fortress for the Roman Empire. It stood for 1,000 years, and it had the most advanced and well thought out defenses for any military in the world at the time, until those defenses just weren't good. Something else innovated to overcome. They didn't continue innovating on their defense strategies, and more advanced attacks broke through their defenses. And so the strategy around this is maturing our security program, right? Not relying on one single point to protect us, like cyber insurance, right? Like we're not at risk because cyber insurance will cover our costs, right? That's not the way to look at this. There's a human element, right? Is the weakest link. multi-layered defense and detection, resilience, and prevention is critical as a part of this.
Yeah, and Michael, how I look at this is at Children's Miracle Network, we look at it as links of a chain. And you're only as strong as your weakest link. So we are charity. We don't have a lot of money. So we have to be very wise about how we spend our money. And so we're always trying to identify what our weakest link is. And then that's our area of investment.
Perfect. Moving on to the CFO's perspective, and I would encourage those that haven't seen this blog to read it. It's a compelling read for sure on that. The CFO's perspective on cybersecurity, right? Risk is a core responsibility of the finance department and the CFO in particular, right? It usually ties up to what is the financial implication of this risk, whether it is related to cybersecurity or some other business-related risk besides cybersecurity. It's very important to understand what those risks are and how they impact the organization. Cybersecurity is not a tech issue, and it's very important to call that out, right? It does often get tied in with IT, but there is so much more of a strategic element to cybersecurity that is process and procedure that is not technology related. And it should be tied in as a material financial risk management strategy. So business risk assessments that you're doing when it's related to your organization should include that cyber risk as well, because it is a large financial burden if there is a breach or an incident that impacts your organization. And we'll talk about those statistics just below here, right? The average cost of a breach in the US, and both of these statistics come from the IBM cost of a data breach report from 2024. The new report will be coming out here in just a couple months. The average cost globally is $4.8 million for a breach. And this is based on thousands of data points, thousands of organizations that report their breach data publicly. What you'll notice is that it's almost twice as high for organizations that exist in the United States, which is everybody on this call. And so it's important to note that the U.S. has a higher cost or a higher burden during a breach, and that's driven by several factors. We'll get into those as we move forward, but it usually ties into regulatory fines. CFOs need to align security spending with financial and strategic priorities, right? Go ahead.
Let me talk about this one, because I think the alignment is something that we focus on at Children's Miracle Network quite a bit because of our limited resources. So we are always looking at where we're spending our money. If we look at our risks, you know, do we want to transfer a risk? Do we want to accept a risk? Do we want to try to remediate it? And later on in the, so I'm imagining a lot of people on the webinar today are in a similar situation. You want to be cost conscious with the money that you spend. And I have a slide about our strategy for minimizing our costs and the process that we go through later in the presentation.
Perfect. One of the other concepts under this bullet point is that reframing cybersecurity cost or expense as an expense to the bottom line of an organization, because cyber really enables the organization, especially in heavily regulated industries like mortgage banking and financial services, right? Without investing in cybersecurity to align with what regulatory bodies are requiring of us, right? We can't do the things that we have to do. We get audited, we get fined, we get shut down, we get a lot of negativity from those items. And so we have to reframe cyber as an expense to the bottom line and frame it more as an enablement to our business and our growth. And then we're going to talk a little bit about measuring the investment. Right, ROI is a common concept at any organization. You want to understand what's your return on investment. For cybersecurity, we talk about ROSI, which is the return on security investment. So we'll go into that a little bit more. On the next slide, pardon me. And so I don't want to belabor this point, because whenever math gets in front of me, sometimes I go glassy-eyed as well. So what's important to note is that ROI is typically driven by tangible results, right? If we put $1 here and we make $5 here, we have a 500% return on investment, right? It's a lot harder to determine that when you're talking security tools, because you have to make assumptions of the average cost of a breach. And so there is a different formula for that. And there are some acronyms in here. There is a slide after this that will explain what those acronyms are, but I'll talk through them. ALE is your annual loss expectancy. So if we do get breached, what is our simple loss expectancy per breach? If it's $50,000, great. How many times are we going to get breached? So it's $50,000 times that number of breaches that you can realistically expect. And that's not just breaches, it's incidents and events that all have to be considered in here. You might get a phishing email that somebody clicks on, and that leads to a minor incident response, but it doesn't lead to a $4.8 million breach, right? We have to take all of those into consideration as a part of this. And so we're basing it off of subjective numbers that are data driven through organizations like the Ponemon Institute that we're pulling some of our data from here. And you have to drive those numbers into your equation and make it make sense for your organization based on your size and other like industry focuses and things like that. And so ROSI is one of the more common return on investment solutions for security. There's also like factor analysis and other concepts that can be leveraged here. This is just one. We try and align with it based on industry data that we can align, because it is one of the more simple models for risk reduction and return on investment. Here's the slide.
Michael, you've got a lot going on that slide. And, there's math equations, there's a lot of bullet points, there's acronyms. And what I do is I boil this down into, for the ROIs for us, is how little can I spend to maximize my security posture. And
right.
So there's always going to be a security gap. And the security gap is, where should I be and where am I right now? And I'm always trying to close that gap and be as frugal with my dollars as possible. So a little bit of different way of looking at it from an implementer standpoint. It's how can I, as cheaply as possible, increase my security posture.
Awesome. That's a great perspective, Tony. The definition slide, I won't belabor this point. This is included in here just to define what some of the areas are looking for in that equation. And then we'll jump into the true cost of a cybersecurity incident. And what we're leveraging here is that IBM cost of a breach report. They've done a ton of research and pulled in a ton of data to talk through this. And so there are several, like 4 key areas where we focus on the cost of a cybersecurity incident. The first being the bottom of this graph here is lost business costs, right? And that, it wavers year over year on what that equals, right? It's not few and far between the organizations are getting breached. We see it all the time, right? Like in the news, there's a big, massive breach, or what we would call like a mega breach. But what we're not seeing is all the other organizations that aren't hitting the major news networks that are getting breached. But that all leads to that lost business cost, which is, the reputational damage that comes out of that, fines, insurance costs, ransomware payments, things along those lines. And so that stays pretty steady year over year. What does increase is the detection and escalation. Attacks are getting well more advanced as we progress, especially with the introduction. I don't know if anybody on this call has heard of AI before, but with the introduction of AI coming out, we're seeing attacks that are far more advanced than what we were used to protecting against, and we're having to really re-up our skill sets and re-up our thought processes on how we're defending against these and how we're identifying, detecting, and remediating against these. The next one would be the post-breach response, right? We've stopped the bleeding from a breach, but now what are we going to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again in a week, in a year, in 5 years? What are we going to do to change that. And you'll see that all of these costs tend to rise year over year. And then the last one would be notification. And that is the one that causes and really ties back into the lost business costs, because you have to notify regulatory bodies, states, attorney generals, if there are people involved, right? PII involved with it. There is a lot there. And I think, Tony, you can probably talk a lot about lost business costs too.
Yeah, for sure. On this one, if we're talking about the true cost of a cyber incident, for a charity, all we really have is our brand. If people don't trust our brand, we don't really have anything. So we partner with some of the biggest organizations in the United States: Walmart's, Costco's, Dairy Queen's, Remax, Marriott, Delta. And if we have a breach, they always have another charity that they can go to. So at the end of the day, loss of reputational trust in us is where the big damage is. And then we layer the financial impact that it would be on top of that, and any other things that come out of here. But again, for a charity, reputational damage is by far the biggest.
Yeah, and I mean, it's different than a financial services organization, because, right, your brand is impacted, which leads to a loss of trust potentially if there is a major breach, and you're subject to donors and organizations working with donors and working to drive funds to your organization. And the ultimate,
and if people don't want to partner with us, then
right,
we're not raising money. And the real impact of this, you and I had a conversation about this, is that
yep,
kids' lives aren't getting saved. So a cybersecurity incident has impact for the children that we are actually trying to save lives for.
exactly, right. It goes far beyond, paying a regulatory fine, and has implications that really you have to think about, like the waves.
Yeah, there's going to be a family that suffers.
For sure. So yeah, it's important to note, like, how a cyber incident impacts you more than just from your wallet perspective, right? Like, yes, we'll lose money and we'll lose donor relations, but that money is actionable towards saving lives and supporting children in these children hospitals. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. We're going to keep on the same slide a little bit more, right? Because there are some factors that we want to touch on that drive an increase to the cost of a breach. And these are things that a lot of organizations suffer from. I mean, I highlighted two here, but I really want to, I'll start from the top, and then I'll let Tony take a couple, right? The systems, like the security system complexity, is one that has the highest average increased cost of a breach, because if you're going into 40 different tool sets to look for and stop this breach, you're wasting a lot of time, and time is money. Downtime impacts you. We'll talk about what those costs are in the future. Also, if you don't have the skills available, like on payroll or through a trusted partner, it definitely will increase, because you have to find those skills, and that takes time. Right? If I could hire employees in 3 seconds, that would be great, but that's not the way that this works. Yeah, third parties are a huge one too, Tony.
Yeah, for us, I'm going to go back to the reputational damage. We are a charity, and people support us, and so we're sending out a lot of T-shirts, a lot of swag that people have earned in their efforts to help us save kids' lives. And we're not a T-shirt company, so we need to send someone's first name, last name, and address to third-party vendors. And that scares us because, again, I think that is, out of all the breaches that we could have, one where we lose PII, where someone's personally identifiable information, is the one that hits our reputation the hardest. And again, I'll go back to, if we don't have a good reputation, our brand is everything for us.
Right. Yeah. And for those on the call, right, third parties are one of the most heavily leveraged concepts for mortgage banks and financial services, right? Like building your own tool greenfield organically is just never going to be as cost effective as aligning with industry professionals that have already built a tool that we need to leverage. I think like loan origination systems or analytics, accounting systems, all of those that tie into your organization that you're literally putting sensitive data into, LOS being probably the number one, right? You have to feed it with data. If that third party gets breached, regardless if it's their fault or your fault, it will impact your reputation because you are the one that leveraged that third party. And then non-compliance with regulations is a huge one because we are in a very heavily regulated, some might even say overly regulated industry in financial services where, not aligning with regulations can mean not getting licensed in a state and losing out on a market to continue to work with. I'll move on now to the cost savings benefits. And so out of the same report, which is a great report, I often recommend that people read this on an annual basis to just understand where things are moving on. But we like to glean a lot of information out of it. Right. These are impacts that over the surveys of thousands of companies, we've determined that breaches cost less if these initiatives are integrated with organizations and leveraged in an impactful manner.
It's no surprise that employee training is at the top, Michael. I think this is one that we focus on very, very heavily at Children's Miracle Network, and I think this is where the dollar buys the most protection. And so what we do is during National Cybersecurity Month, Awareness Month, which is October, we do a big blitz, and we have games and challenges, and we do our cybersecurity training. We do a lot of blog posts, internal Slack or team messages, and we hit it hard. And then we continue that throughout the year with trying to stay relevant and in front of our employee base so that security is always on the top of their mind. So if we see something happening in the world, we try to make a comment on it to bring real world examples into the everyday workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely increases vigilance for sure. And that vigilance is one of those things that's like out of sight, out of mind, right? If you're not being constantly reminded like, hey, there are phishing attacks coming in, the number one tool set that people are working in is their email tool set, right? And that's where all of these blasts are coming in. So reminding people to be vigilant takes a couple seconds from an email or a Slack, as you said, something organization-wide. We like to at Richie May leverage micro training, which is 4 minutes a month, where it talks about a different concept over 4 minutes, right? And we've seen our failures from a phishing testing perspective drop significantly. We actually have a study that shows that as we move forward. Other items on this list that really are impactful, right? Leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning to drive threat intelligence back to your organization, to review your alerts that are coming through your security stack, and perform the manual functions that typically somebody would have to look into individually, right? Leveraging AI to do that really increases that cost there, because they're going to look at every single item that's coming through from a logging perspective to your organization. Whereas if you have a person doing that manually, you tend to get this fatigue, right? There are errors and misses that can happen. And so that lowers the cost. I think preparation and incident response planning is also very critical. Probably my number two under employee training, Tony, because if you're not prepared for an incident response, then right, you're a bunch of chickens running around with your head cut off, right?
Yeah, I've got a good story for later in the webinar about that. But Michael, the thing that I noticed about this slide is I've referenced links of a chain, and a lot of these are the links in the chain. And so we have to apply at Children's Miracle Network some spending against each of these links so that we don't have one of those links that's out there being really, really weak. So these are a lot of different areas, and some of these, we didn't even know about for until we started to do some assessing. And once we became aware of it, then we applied a little bit of money to it, and we just try to get better and better each year.
Yeah, awesome. I'll move on as we continue to talk through cost savings, right? These are tangible savings that you would experience from, right, if you were to ever experience a cyber incident or event or breach, right? This would lower the cost of that, right? The total value of implementing all of these is, $4.1 million, right? That you would save off of a $4.8 million global breach cost, right? The real concept here is that financially might not be viable to implement all of these, and some of these might not even impact our organization if we're not doing our own software development. And so it's really looking at these and understanding, like, over a roadmap or time, assessing your organization, understanding where those gaps are. Implementing these might be some quicker wins that you can understand would not just lower the cost of a breach, but lower the likelihood of one as well. Jump to the cyber insurance cost savings. There's a couple things on here that, right, like pulling levers as you're going into your cyber insurance conversations on an annual basis with your broker can really uplift that conversation and lower costs. And I have some case studies specifically for, Richie May alone, saving, 30% on our cyber insurance by enforcing multi-factor authentication for every employee and implementing a managed detection and response solution, one that is monitored 24/7. Those two top bolded points there really drove down the cost of our cyber insurance, not just the annual cost, but also the deductible costs in our cyber insurance, right? We used to have a much higher deductible, but since the likelihood of our breach stopped or went down because we implemented multi-factor authentication and endpoint detection and response that's managed, right? The understanding that our deductible could go down too, because we're way less likely to experience a breach or be impacted by an event, a cybersecurity event.
And Michael, the last one, doing cybersecurity training is another one of those things that will lower your cyber insurance costs. And, it is so cheap to implement it. I mean, we make blog posts that are, they cost us virtually nothing. And the thing about this, you had a slide earlier that said the human factor is the weakest link. So the cheapest solution going to affect the weakest link really is a great way to maximize dollars, because if most of your attacks are coming in through people, training is fixing that, and training is cheap.
Yes, and training doesn't have to be a tool set that you purchase, as you're stating, right? It could be an email out to the staff or a blog post that you...
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a video, something that they watch. It's a blog post. It is, someone does something wrong, and I go and have a chat with them. There's a lot of different ways that you can train, and it's just staying in front of them with all that different type of information, and that's great training.
Yeah, that constant reminder really, really drives that vigilance up. And I think the next slide really ties this point into right, conducting training inside of organizations.
Ouch.
This is a common meme we leverage across the board, right? You can have everything purchased inside your organization, but there's always going to be some sort of vulnerability in the armor, and that is typically the human link that we're talking about in this chain, right? You can have all these things available. And I think the statistics are that 82% of cyber incidents are actually caused by human involvement, human error in that. The next slide is compliance and regulatory savings. And these ones, again, the tangibility of them are not, tied directly to ROI. If we do spend $1 on this, we save $5 here. But compliance is a core part of the financial services industry. If you're not compliant, you're not doing business with the federal government, with states, with anybody realistically. And there are audits that come from states, that come from federal departments. And so, right, there are just core statistics here, right? On average, the cost of noncompliance is 2.7 times higher than the cost of maintaining compliance. So having a thoughtful program, one with processes and procedures drawn out that align with compliance and update to meet compliance on an annual or biannual basis, whatever that needs to be, really drive down expenses rather than having to make it happen in the moment of an audit. Cybersecurity controls, like a thoughtful program, one built to drive towards compliance and protection in your organization, reduces your audit burden. Like regulations are pretty much only increasing, right? As you drive into another state to do business, as we've seen over the last couple years, regulations are increasing specifically for incident notification requirements, right? HUD's notification requirement is, as of June of last year, is a 12-hour notification, which, 12 hours is a long time if you have to sit and listen to your son learn how to play the saxophone, but it's not a long time when you're experiencing a breach, right? It takes a long time to just understand if you have been impacted materially from a breach or an incident, and then figuring out who to notify and when could be its own puzzle. And so making sure the program is well documented and drives to, right, your incident response plan, stating your notification requirements is very important. And efficiency through preparedness. This is one where
yeah, Michael, I've got a great story I referenced earlier, and since we practice our incident response, we were ready when that fateful day came. And for us, it was at the beginning of COVID, and the Department of Homeland Security and a couple of other federal agencies were making posts about having credible evidence that Russia was going to attack hospitals that could produce a vaccine for COVID. And if Russia was first to market with a COVID vaccine, they would benefit politically and economically from being first to market. So what the Russian government did was they went to the dark web. They found a set of credentials for someone at Children's Miracle Network. They took those credentials and they got onto this person's email. And so they were in there, and what they did is they went to the sent folder. They deleted out the body of the text. They inserted their payload, so nothing was in there except the subject line and their payload. But this was an email thread and chain that was relevant. It was at the top of this person's inbox, and they sent it out. Well, we were prepared. We had practiced our incident response, and we had someone that responded to getting that email within 5 minutes. Once we were alerted, we started to take countermeasures, and we were just lucky enough to be able to ward off and once we started to take countermeasures, they noticed and they fled. But we were lucky enough to defend against, someone that's got way more resources than our charity does. So yeah, you need to be prepared, and we practice. We know how to get through incidents, and if we really get into trouble, we're going to call you.
Yeah, I have a metaphor that I love that talks about preparing for an incident, because I work with organizations all the time that'll call me and say, "Hey, there's a ransom note on our file system, and we don't know what to do," right? And time is really of the essence in a lot of these, and so my metaphor is really like I don't wake up one morning and decide to go run 26.2 miles in a marathon, right? Like, and nobody would. That would be crazy. You would probably die of exhaustion and cramp your legs at some point, because that's a lot to run without any kind of practice. And so most people that run marathons spend a good portion of a year, if not longer, training for that, so that they can get up for the one day. And they never run 26 miles to that point. Typically they create sprints to drive muscle memory and drive the capability for their body to push through the long haul of a 26-mile marathon. And so that metaphor is exactly why we encourage organizations, and it's also regulatorily driven in the financial services industry, to test your incident response plan. Pretend that you're going through a cybersecurity incident so that you know who to call, when to call them, how to notify people, right? You don't want your IT guy talking to CNN and Fox News when you get breached, because he's going to give way too much information and not have the correct response for PR when it comes to that. And so all of those things need to be not just documented, but tested, so that when the day does come, you are running the marathon as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, I love the marathon metaphor. I was a runner in college, and just another word on preparedness. One of the things, and this is applicable for a ransomware attack, we deleted our Azure instance 3 Fridays ago and rebuilt it. We didn't do our production one, but we did one of our development environments. And if there is a ransomware attack, we have the confidence now that we can rebuild within 48 hours. And most of that time is just transferring data. But we have a lot more confidence now that we are prepared if, we do get hit with ransomware. Now, we put a lot of effort into making sure that we don't have a ransomware attack, but you also need to focus on your response and recovery and be prepared in case something does hit you.
Yeah, 48 hours is a long time to go without core systems, right? And I think FEMA even defined the cost of a downtime to be $5,600 a minute. Yeah.
So what I did with that 48 hours is, I went to our executive team and I said, okay, where do you want us to be? If the requirement is we need to be up in 24 hours, I will go out and figure out how to reduce that, but it's going to cost money. So we had this discussion about the amount of risk, the amount of time that it takes for us to get back up. And just doing that gave us knowledge and the ability to make better decisions. And so our executive team, our board knows that we'll be up in 48 hours if we get hit with a ransomware attack. And if we want it to be less than that, we need to spend time and effort and money to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Data-informed decisions for sure. Last slide before a poll question here. One of the areas we want to touch on is how to reduce spend without sacrificing or increasing risk, right? Without sacrificing tool sets and things along those lines, right? And how to keep that risk still low. The first one is maximize what you already own. A lot of organizations are invested in Microsoft. It's actually probably the #1 tool set that most organizations buy. The only other options are Google and an Apple organization, which are just more costly to some extent. And Microsoft has a ton of tool sets that come with their licensing that typically go unused. I'd say about 30% of Microsoft's features are actually leveraged at most organizations. And those tool sets span not just IT help and data analytics, but also cybersecurity, right? They have their own tools, their own security tool sets in Microsoft Defender. Sentinel-1 is another one. It is a cybersecurity platform for antivirus, endpoint detection and response, but there are also firewall tool sets and management tool sets, cloud protection and identity protection tool sets, DLP, the list goes on. And so a lot of organizations typically buy these tool sets for one or two things: Microsoft for email and file sharing, Sentinel-1 for antivirus and EDR. But really understanding the breadth of what you're purchasing really can help lower tech debt by purchasing other tool sets to do what you might already own to do. Conducting a cyber tool or tech stack assessment, making sure that you don't have shelfware just sitting around, that you're realizing your investment in that. Understanding your managed security services and your managed service and like IT service providers. They might have those bundled licensing included in your quote, and you may not be leveraging those. And then consolidation of tool sets, right? You may have 3 tool sets that all do the same thing. And that really comes back to that tech stack assessment, is what are we already paying for? And then how much redundancy do we have? And do we want that redundancy for defense in depth, or do we not? Is it just causing too much of a resource burden? And so these are 4 aspects to touch on. Any
Well, Michael, and reducing cost in tools is another thing that we focus on. And again, we apply money to our weakest links. And as long as a tool doesn't solve one of our weakest links, we don't spend money on there until it becomes our weakest link. So that's just one of the strategies that we use.
Yeah, and you probably, right, that ties back into the strategy of assessing first, and we'll get to that slide here towards the end, but it's important
absolutely.
to note. So next poll question, we'll leave it here for a couple seconds, and we have 3 poll questions coming up, 2 more after this one. So how involved is your C-suite in the cybersecurity strategy? I have my own opinions on this one, having worked with several hundred organizations. So and keep in mind, I believe you do have to answer if you are looking for CPE credits. All right. Give it just a couple more seconds before we move on. Pretty decent responses here. And the poll goes very involved. Not shocking to me in the mortgage industry. It tends to really drive up there. Not involved down at the bottom is one of those ones where I see that in a lot of other industries, mostly unregulated industries. But when you're in a heavily regulated industry, we tend to see the C-suite heavily involved there. And so we've been talking about this process. Tony has a process that he leverages, and I'll hand it over to him to talk through what that process is.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. One of the things that we try to do is control our costs on people. So we try to only have staff on hand for the things that are done regularly, repetitively, so that we can reduce that cost. So the first thing that we do is we go out and we get external assessments to notify us and let us know what chains we have, what links we have in our chain, which of those links are the weakest. And those are going to be the areas that we focus on. And then our second step is what we do is we remediate the weakest links and where we are getting the greatest exposure. So when we assess, we always do that externally. We are not the experts. We don't have that broad, deep knowledge that we can purchase one time and then remediate and monitor. So after the assessment, we remediate and we fix it. That can be done if it's a remediation that needs to be done, say to email. We have an email administrator. We do those remediations internally. there's sometimes when the remediations get a little bit more sophisticated and we need help. The third is where a lot of our cost savings come in, is we bring the regular, the time-consuming things in-house, and we do that with staff. And then the last step is we're continually addressing the weakest link and trying to do something a little bit more, implement a new process, train on a different subject. And then eventually there's always going to be a gap, and there'll come a day when we decide, okay, we're at a good spot. We're not to that spot now. And so we're continually improving our security posture.
Yeah, I love this process because it's consumable, right? It's not 55 steps. And what I will caution against is, in a process like this, is a lot of organizations stop at that assess, right? They get the assessment and they're like, great, we're done, right? The remediation is
assessment's just to make informed decisions, and
right.
it's going to tell me where my critical high, medium, and low issues are, and we always address the highs, the criticals and highs, and then we make informed decisions on the medium and low, and we don't pursue the mediums and low in the same time frames as we hit those criticals and highs.
Perfect. I did put together a quick case study. I think we're coming towards the end here, and I want to leave time if there are questions, but we have several clients in the mortgage industry, and this particular one, we're not going to call names or anything like that, really was struggling with a heavy finding IT audit, right? Findings that were coming back from a more audit that and a state audit, actually, where they didn't want to move forward until specific items were remediated, right? There was no centralized incident response plan. There was no multi-factor authentication in the organization. And they could just identify a lot of risk coming out of that. So those were the top findings for the organization themselves. Their insurance premiums were increasing year over year by 10, 15%. And so, after doing an assessment, we identified, well, you do have phishing, you have the capabilities to perform multi-factor authentication, right? You don't have a fully fledged incident response program in your organization. We identified those. We built out a roadmap to remediate those findings by implementing, a training stack for them that would train their organization on a monthly basis, and also do monthly phishing simulations so that you can drive to a ratio of effectiveness there. Their phishing rate dropped from 32% failure to 5% failure, which 5% is pretty good in most industries from a failure perspective, right? There's always going to be human error in that weakest link is that human element, as Tony's pointed out. And so as we went through this and started implementing multi-factor authentication and conditional access policies in Microsoft, right? They didn't take on more tech debt. They were implementing through tool sets that they already owned and just needed to enforce across the organization. And they saw a realization, or the ROSI, of about 1,100% based on what they spent to get to this point. And we built out a programmatic perspective from a security mindset that drove this cybersecurity culture in the organization to continuously improve year over year to make sure that they were managing costs, hitting budgets, and remaining secure. And then as an output from that was they were passing their audits from that point moving forward, aligning with compliance and regulations. We're coming towards the end here, so we're going to speed through some of these questions. Do you calculate ROI or ROSI on your security investments? I haven't seen a lot of ROSI out there, but I would be interested in everybody's opinions on that. We'll give it a couple seconds to get through this question before we move on to the next one. right. Gonna move on here. We only have just a handful of wrap-up slides left because we are coming to the end with about 5 minutes left. If you do have questions, I believe there is a chat feature on here. You can throw questions through there. Responses still coming in here. Then we'll move forward. Looks like there are some organizations, but this is not shocking to me at all. I don't know, Tony, if it's shocking to you, that are not actually performing an ROI or some sort of return on investment for security investments.
Yeah, that's not a shock to me for sure. Yeah, we don't at Children's Miracle Network. When you were on that ROI Rossi slide, I view it in a little bit of a different way, and yep. I'm always looking for the dollars and trying to minimize that. So we're not quite as formal, but it doesn't surprise me for sure.
Perfect. Next slide is just an action plan for CFOs. We'll skip through these real quick, right? As you're looking to lower your costs or realize more out of your cybersecurity investment, is really doing the assessment of your cybersecurity program to make sure that there are no gaps. The gaps are covered. You have a documented program that lists your strengths, and you understand what those gaps are so that you can remediate
Michael,
them.
on that one, the assessment is how we make informed decision about everything else. Depends on the assessment. Do I want to remediate? Do I want to transfer the risk? Do I want to accept the risk? And so everything for us starts with the assessment. It's the first step for me to make an informed decision. So yeah, that's an important
one. It's right. It's without the assessment, you are flying blind for sure in a lot of this. And so making sure you do that.
Well,
that
and
assessment
and we can be investing money in the wrong areas. We may say,
yep.
We may say, oh, we need this new tool, but it may be a new tool in an area that is not the weakest link in our chain. So if we're not making the informed decision, we might be not only not saving money, but we're going to be spending more in the wrong areas.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to call that out. As is one of the outputs of that assessment. Number two would be, from that assessment, identifying quick wins, which might be, we're making the wrong investment over here, right? We'll identify cost savings, but also there are procedural aspects that we could improve upon. Maybe there's another technology we can implement, or we need to look for more talent or skill set on the team. Aligning that security strategy with the business and financial goals. This has been something that I've been hitting on for 15 or 20 years now. Cybersecurity is often not considered as a part of the overall success factors for an organization. And so you tend to see cyber risks segmented from actual risks to the organization. A tornado could come and take out your building is just as impactful as a ransomware, if not ransomware being more impactful to the organization nowadays from a cost perspective. And then step 4, leverage your trusted partners to make and assist in the cost-effective risk management solutions that you're doing. Next poll question, and we are really close to running out of time here. Are there any areas you are focusing on improving over the next year? We'll give that just a couple seconds here as we wrap up this. All right. And we'll bring it to the key takeaways here. The first key takeaway that I like to drive forward is cybersecurity is not just an expense, but it is a cost center reducer. It's not a tech line item. It is an enabler for business growth in almost every industry. Make sure that cyber initiatives are cross-functional, right? Cyber is everybody's responsibility. Track your security investments through equations like ROSI or ROI, or as Tony was talking, like, is it Is it creating the effect that we need in our organization? Leverage Tony's assess, remediate, maintain, and implement. Wash, rinse, repeat, right? It is not a single time use, Tony.
Absolutely. We're always focusing on it, and just like we're training consistently, we're always trying to improve in our cybersecurity department as well.
Absolutely. And then a concept that I bring up, and I've been known to say this all the time: security is a journey, not a destination. Right? It is not something that you do once and then walk away from. It is constantly evolving, and you as an organization have to evolve with the security journey as well. Some next steps here.
And if you do have any questions, sorry, Michael, if they do have any questions, you can leave them in the Q&A section, and we will follow up with an email and get answers out to those questions.
After the fact, yes. And actually, here's some contact information as well. Both Tony and myself, and this deck will be coming out. And then follow-on questions, if you have any further questions or would like to understand what an assessment looks like, please feel free to email info@richemay.com. I really appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you, Tony, for joining us and providing the valuable input that you had here. It was great talking alongside you.